In the quiet dawn of February 1942, a solitary figure approached the village of Drakulic, his black cassock fluttering gently in the chill Balkan wind like a shadow detached from the fading night. The villagers, weary from the endless grip of war, stirred from their modest homes at the sound of his voice, calm and reassuring, carrying the weight of divine authority. He was a priest, after all, a man of God in these God-forsaken times, and he called to them with promises of solace. "Come, my children," he said, his tone laced with paternal warmth that masked the storm brewing beneath. "Gather in the schoolhouse. Let us pray together for peace in these troubled days. Bring the little ones forward. They are the purest among us, and heaven smiles upon their innocence." The people of Drakulic, simple Serb farmers and their families, complied without question, for who would suspect malice from a Franciscan friar? Mothers clutched their infants close, fathers guided their sons and daughters by the hand, and soon the schoolroom filled with over 100 souls, the children seated at the front as instructed, their small faces upturned in trusting expectation. The air hung heavy with the scent of wood smoke and unwashed wool, the murmurs of anticipation giving way to a hushed reverence as the priest stood before them, his hands folded in apparent benediction. For a moment all seemed right in this corner of the independent state of Croatia, a puppet regime forged in the fires of Nazi occupation, where faith might still offer refuge from the encroaching darkness. But then, without warning, the priest's demeanor shifted, subtle at first, like the first crack in a frozen river before the deluge. He reached into the folds of his robe, and from it emerged not a crucifix or a Bible, but a grotesque instrument of death, the Serbsiek, the Serb cutter, a 12-centimeter curved blade affixed to a leather glove, designed for efficiency in the art of slaughter. Its edge gleamed dully in the morning light filtering through the schoolhouse windows, a tool crafted specifically for the Ustaše, the fascist movement that ruled this fractured land with iron and blood. The villagers' confusion turned to terror as the friar lunged forward, his first strike swift and merciless, slicing across the throat of a young boy at the front row, blood spraying in an arc that painted the chalkboard behind him. Screams erupted, piercing the air like shattered glass, but the priest, now revealed as something far removed from holiness, moved with mechanical precision, his face contorted, not in rage, but in a cold, almost ecstatic focus. He was not alone. Ustaše soldiers, hidden until that moment, burst through the doors, their knives and axes joining the fray in a symphony of carnage. Children, those innocent souls he had positioned so deliberately at the forefront, were the first to fall, their tiny bodies crumpling under the onslaught, mothers wailing as they tried in vain to shield them, fathers charging forward only to be cut down mid-stride. The floor slicked with blood, the walls echoing with pleas for mercy that went unanswered, as the massacre unfolded in waves of unrelenting violence. In that single day, February 7th, 1942, over 2,300 Serb civilians perished across the villages of Drakulic, Motike, and Šagovac near Banja Luka, their lives extinguished in a premeditated orgy of hatred orchestrated by the Ustaše regime. The schoolhouse in Šagovac became a charnel house, where families who had gathered for prayer found only death. Witnesses who survived the initial assault, those few who managed to flee or hide, would later recount the friar's methodical approach, how he paused between kills to wipe his blade clean on his cassock, his eyes devoid of remorse, perhaps even alight with a perverse satisfaction. One survivor, a woman who escaped by feigning death amid the bodies, described how the priest personally slaughtered children with his serbosek, boasting of his efficiency as if tallying souls for some infernal ledger. "He cut their throats like lambs," she whispered in later testimony, her voice breaking under the weight of memory. The blade, engineered for quick, silent kills, allowed the killers to work without the noise of gunfire alerting neighboring villages, turning the massacre into a silent horror that unfolded in the intimacy of close quarters. Bodies piled upon bodies, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the final gasps of the dying, until the schoolroom resembled a slaughterhouse more than a place of learning. By midday, the Ustaše had moved on to the mines and homes, dragging workers from their shifts and families from their hearths, extending the killing spree until the sun set on fields stained red. This was no random act of wartime brutality, it was a calculated extermination, part of the Ustaše's genocidal campaign against Serbs, Jews, and Roma in the Independent State of Croatia, a regime propped up by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The friar at the center of this nightmare was Miroslav Filipović-Majstorović, a man who would earn the moniker Father Satan for deeds that shocked even the hardened architects of the Holocaust. But how did a servant of the Church, sworn to peace and compassion, become the embodiment of such unbridled evil? To understand the depths of his descent, we must journey back to his beginnings, peeling away the layers of a life that began in apparent normalcy and ended in infamy. Born on June 5, 1915, in the town of Jajce, nestled in the rugged landscapes of Bosnia-Herzegovina, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Miroslav Filipović-Majstorović grew up in a world teetering on the brink of transformation. The region, a mosaic of ethnic tensions between Croats, Serbs, and Muslims, simmered with nationalist fervor even before the guns of World War I reshaped the map. Little is known of his childhood, those formative years shrouded in the mists of history, but records suggest a boy of modest means, perhaps drawn to the church as a path to stability and purpose amid the chaos of post-imperial Yugoslavia. At the age of 14, Filipović-Majstorović entered the Franciscan high school in Visoko, embracing the Franciscan order founded by Saint Francis of Assisi, a saint renowned for his devotion to poverty, humility, and harmony with all creation. The Franciscans, with their vows of chastity, obedience, and service to the marginalized, taught principles that echoed the Gospels. Blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies, and the radical call to see Christ in the face of every suffering soul. Young Miroslav Filipović-Majstorović would have studied theology in Sarajevo, immersing himself in scriptures that condemned violence and exalted mercy, learning to administer sacraments that bound communities in faith rather than tear them asunder. Ordained as a priest in 1939, he served in various parishes, his early ministry marked by the routine duties of a cleric, baptisms, confessions, masses for the faithful. Yet somewhere in this journey a shadow fell across his soul. Was it the rising tide of Croatian nationalism, fueled by resentment against the Yugoslav monarchy's perceived favoritism toward Serbs, or the seductive pull of Ante Pavelić's Ustaše movement, which promised an independent Croatia, purified of alien elements? Filipović's radicalization accelerated in the late 1930s as he gravitated toward extremist circles, his sermons reportedly taking on a sharper edge of ethnic hatred. By 1941, with the Axis invasion carving Yugoslavia into puppet states, he fully embraced the Ustaše ideology, trading his Franciscan habit for the uniform of a military chaplain. Scripture says heaven rejoices when a sinner repents. But when a man of God turns to evil, hell itself throws a feast. For Father Satan, Miroslav Filipović-Majstorović, the devils danced in triumph. What twisted alchemy transforms a priest into a butcher? Psychologists and historians have pondered this enigma, suggesting perhaps a confluence of personal ambition, ideological indoctrination, and the intoxicating power offered by a regime that sanctified murder. In the Ustaše's worldview, Serbs were Orthodox heretics, Jews economic parasites, and Roma societal dregs, all to be eradicated for the glory of a pure Croatian state. Filipović, donning the title of lieutenant in the Ustaše militia, found in this doctrine a license to unleash whatever darkness lurked within him. His participation in the Drakulić massacre was not a momentary lapse, but the ignition of a reign of terror that would stain the annals of human depravity. Following the slaughter, Filipović's star rose swiftly in Ustaše ranks, his brutality earning him command positions where he could indulge his sadism on a grander scale. The Independent State of Croatia, under Pavelić's iron fist, operated as a fascist theocracy of sorts, blending Catholic symbolism with genocidal fervor, and Miroslav Filipović embodied this unholy fusion. The Ustaše movement, born in the 1920s as an underground terrorist group, exploded into power with Nazi backing in 1941, establishing the NDH as a buffer against Allied advances in the Balkans. Ante Pavelić, the Poglavnik, or leader, had spent years in exile in Italy, honing his vision of a Croatia free from Serbian influence, drawing inspiration from Mussolini's fascism and Hitler's racial policies. The Ustaše's name derived from ustati, meaning to rise up. symbolizing their insurrection against the Yugoslav kingdom. They were not mere collaborators, they were fanatics who viewed genocide as a sacred duty, their black uniforms and U insignia becoming synonyms for terror. Why did the Nazis and fascists grant them such free rein? Strategic expediency played a key role. Hitler, fixated on the Eastern Front and the Soviet juggernaut, viewed the NDH as a reliable ally to secure supply lines and suppress partisan resistance led by Josip Broz Tito. Mussolini, eyeing territorial gains in Dalmatia and the Adriatic coast, tolerated Pavelic's excesses as long as they served Italian interests, even annexing parts of the NDH to curb Ustaše overreach. Yet the Ustaše's methods, primitive, visceral, and often theatrical, contrasted sharply with the Nazis' industrialized killing machines. Where Auschwitz employed gas chambers for efficiency, Ustaše camps like Jasenovac relied on knives, hammers, and axes, turning extermination into a personal, intimate horror that left perpetrators covered in the blood of the victims. Filipović thrived in this environment, his clerical collar a grotesque accessory to his uniform as he oversaw mass executions. Reports from survivors paint a portrait of a man who derived pleasure from the act, often participating directly, his face impassive as he wielded the Serbosiek or ordered inmates to their knees for ritualistic throat slitings. The Serbosiek itself was a chilling innovation, a glove-mounted blade curved like a scythe, allowing for rapid, silent kills that minimized ammunition use and maximized terror. Filipović was known to demonstrate its use on prisoners, slicing with such precision that victims barely had time to react before collapsing in fountains of blood. His role extended beyond mere executioner. As a chaplain, he infused the killings with a pseudo-religious fervor, blessing the guards before massacres, and preaching sermons that twisted Catholic doctrine to justify genocide. "We are doing God's work," he would say, his voice carrying the authority of his Franciscan training, as if the Vatican itself sanctioned the slaughter. This blend of faith and fascism made him particularly dangerous, for it demoralized victims who saw their spiritual symbols turned against them. As Filipovic's atrocities mounted, whispers of unease rippled even through Axis channels. In a letter dated around mid-1942, Italian General Alessandro Luzzana wrote to Mussolini, documenting the horrors perpetrated by Ustaše forces in Bosnia, including massacres that targeted women and children with medieval savagery. "Dear Duce," the general penned, his words heavy with revulsion, "my unlimited loyalty to you compels me to report deviations that would stain our alliance." He described scenes of villages razed, bodies mutilated, and priests like Filipović leading the charge, arguing that such unchecked barbarism risked alienating local populations and fueling partisan recruitment. The fascists, ever conscious of their image as civilizers in the Mediterranean, needed to distance themselves from these excesses to maintain control over annexed territories. Mussolini, though dismissive at first, eventually pressured Pavelić to rein in his more zealous subordinates, but the damage was done. Filipović's name featured prominently in these dispatches. His role in Drakulić, cited as an example of fanaticism that embarrassed even Rome's hardened diplomats. The letter highlighted specific incidents, such as the public display of severed heads on poles, acts that Luzzana deemed unworthy of a civilized army, underscoring the growing rift between Italian pragmatism and Ustaše zealotry. By April 1942, Filipović had ascended to the position of chief guard at Jasenovac, the NDH's largest concentration camp, a sprawling complex along the Sava River where death was administered with chilling variety. Dubbed the Auschwitz of the Balkans, Jasenovac housed Serbs, Jews, Roma, and political dissidents in conditions of abject misery, starvation, forced labor, and daily executions that claimed tens of thousands. As Commandant from June to October 1942, Miroslav Filipović-Majstorović, in full Ustaše regalia, ruled with a tyranny that earned him the eternal sobriquet Brother Satan. Survivors recounted his mourning rituals, where he would select prisoners for special treatment, forcing them to dig their own graves before bludgeoning them with mallets or drowning them in the river's murky rivers. One particularly harrowing account describes Filipović challenging guards to killing contests, wagering on who could slit the most throats in an hour, his laughter echoing across the barracks as blood pooled at his feet. The camp's infrastructure, rudimentary compared to Nazi facilities, amplified the personal nature of the violence. No anonymous gas chambers here, but face-to-face murder that left perpetrators and victims locked in a macabre dance. Under Miroslav Filipović-Majstrović's oversight, the Ustaše experimented with Zyklon B gas chambers supplied through Nazi channels, but the poorly sealed facilities inflicted agonizing, drawn-out deaths rather than swift extermination, leading to a reliance on more primitive tools like the Serb for efficiency. The gas operations at Jasenovac and its subcamp Stara Gradiška were crude adaptations of German methods, using Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide, and sulfur dioxide in makeshift chambers fashioned from existing buildings. Unlike the airtight, industrialized killing rooms of Auschwitz, these structures were hastily converted barracks or cellars with inadequate ventilation and sealing, allowing gas to leak unevenly. Victims crammed into these spaces would suffer prolonged agony, choking on fumes that burned their lungs and eyes, convulsing in pain as the poison took hold slowly, sometimes over hours rather than minutes. Survivor testimonies revealed the horror of incomplete gassings, where some inmates emerged alive but horribly injured, blinded, scarred by chemical burns, or gasping for air, only to be finished off with bullets or blades. Egon Berger, a Jewish survivor, described in his memoir, 44 Months in Jasenovac, how the gas would seep out through cracks, prolonging the suffering and forcing guards to wait longer before entering to remove bodies, an inefficiency that frustrated the camp's operations. This unreliability stemmed from the Ustaše's lack of technical expertise and resources. They relied on sporadic supplies from Nazi allies, but without proper engineering, the chambers often failed to deliver the quick, clean deaths intended. As a result, Miroslav Filipović and his subordinates reverted to manual methods, like the curved blade Serb, which allowed for personal control and immediate results, aligning with the regime's emphasis on terror through intimacy. The scale of suffering at Jasenovac defied comprehension, with estimates of victims ranging from 80,000 to over 100,000, many perishing in epidemics or from exhaustion, others in mass liquidations orchestrated under Filipović's watchful eye. He extended his command to the women's camp at Stara Gradiška, where similar horrors unfolded, including experiments in cruelty that targeted mothers and children. Inmates whispered of his nocturnal visits, where he would preach twisted sermons before selecting individuals for torture, blending religious rhetoric with sadistic glee. "God has forsaken you," he would intone, his voice a mockery of pastoral care, as guards herded prisoners toward the killing fields. The Ustaše's ideological fervor, rooted in a distorted Catholicism that viewed Serbs as schismatics, deserving extinction, found its perfect vessel in Filipović, whose Franciscan training provided a veneer of legitimacy to the genocide. Survivor Milko Riffer recounted in post-war trials how Filipović personally executed groups of Jewish prisoners, forcing them to sing Croatian nationalist songs before their deaths, a psychological torment that broke spirits before bodies. Yet, even in the warped moral landscape of World War II, Filipović's excesses proved too much. In a rare instance of Axis intervention, the Nazis issued what amounted to a cease and desist order against him. German officers stationed in the NDH to coordinate military efforts filed reports expressing disgust at the Ustaše's inefficiency and brutality, which they argued hampered the war effort by inciting widespread rebellion. General Edmund Gleiser von Horstenau, the Wehrmacht's plenipotentiary in Zagreb, documented Filipović's actions in dispatches to Berlin, describing the priest's methods as bestial and counterproductive. The Ustaše are committing atrocities that would shame even the most hardened SS, one report allegedly noted, highlighting how Filipović's public displays of violence, such as parading severed heads through villages, fueled Yugoslav partisan recruitment under Tito. Hitler himself, in a meeting with Pavelić, demanded reforms, leading to Filipović's removal from Jasenovac in October 1942. Suspended by the Holy See, though the Holy See's response was tepid at best, he was briefly arrested by German authorities for war crimes, but released through Ustaše intervention, reassigned to lesser duties until the regime's collapse. The cease and desist reflected broader Nazi frustrations. While they supplied weapons and logistical support, the Ustaše's chaotic, passion-driven killings contrasted with the Reich's bureaucratic efficiency, risking the stability of the southeastern front. As the tides of war turned, with Allied advances and partisan gains eroding the NDH's grip, Filipović fled the crumbling fascist edifice. Captured by Yugoslav forces in early 1945 near the Austrian border, disguised as a civilian among refugees, he was transported to Zagreb for trial. The People's Court, established by Tito's communist government, sought to expose the full extent of Ustaše crimes, and Filipović's case became a centerpiece of post-war reckoning. Survivors flooded the proceedings with testimonies that painted a vivid portrait of his sadism. One witness, a Serb inmate from Jasenovac named Dragutin Roller, described how Filipović had forced prisoners to build a pyramid of death, stacking bodies of the slain as a macabre monument before executing more atop it. Another, a Roma woman named Milka Petrović, recounted the gassing attempts at Stara Gradiška, where leaks allowed her to survive with severe burns, only to face Filipović's blade the next day. She escaped by hiding in a latrine pit for hours. The trial revealed documents from Ustaše archives, including orders signed by Filipović authorizing mass executions and requisitions for Zyklon B, underscoring his administrative role in the genocide. Filipović, defiant throughout, claimed his actions were defensive measures against perceived threats to Croatian sovereignty, invoking nationalist rhetoric that fell flat in a court determined to dismantle the fascist legacy. Sentenced to death on June 29, 1946, he was hanged in Zagreb's central prison, his body consigned to an unmarked grave to prevent it from becoming a martyr's shrine. Witnesses to the execution noted his final words, a muttered prayer in Latin, perhaps a last grasp at the faith he had so grotesquely perverted. His death marked the end of one chapter in Yugoslavia's bloody history, but the scars remained, festering through decades of suppressed memory under Tito's regime. The legacy of Miroslav Filipović-Majstorović endures as a cautionary tale of faith corrupted by nationalism, a stark reminder of how ideology can pervert the human soul. In modern Croatia, his name evokes heated debates over historical revisionism. Some far-right groups downplay Ustaše atrocities, portraying figures like Filipović as patriots defending against communism, while others, including historians and human rights advocates, push for full acknowledgement through memorials at Jasenovac. The site's museum, established in the 1960s but updated post-Yugoslav wars, houses artifacts like the Serbo-Sjek and survivor artworks depicting the gas chamber horrors, serving as a bulwark against denial. Globally, Filipović stands as a symbol of clerical fascism, his story intertwined with broader questions about the Catholic Church's role during the Holocaust. Though the Vatican defrocked him posthumously in 1946, critics argue the response came too late, with Pius XII's silence on NDH crimes enabling such figures. Psychological analyses suggest Filipović might have exhibited traits of psychopathy, his religious vocation a mask for deeper sadistic impulses, amplified by the war's chaos. Comparisons to other war criminals, like Nazi doctors or Khmer Rouge executioners, highlight how ordinary men can become monsters when power absolves morality. The victims of Drakulic and Jasenovac, their voices preserved in survivor testimonies and mass graves unearthed in post-war excavations, demand remembrance, a bulwark against forgetting. Mass graves near Banja Luka, exhumed in the 1990s, revealed skeletal remains bearing marks of Srbosije cuts, silent witnesses to the terror. In books like Vladimir Dedier's The Yugoslav, Auschwitz and the Vatican, detailed accounts from survivors like Ilya Ivanović describe Filipović's killing contests, where guards competed to murder the most inmates in a day, with the priest awarding prizes of extra rations. These narratives, corroborated by International Court of Justice documents from the Croatia v. Serbia genocide case, underscore the systematic nature of the crimes, estimating Jasenovac's death toll at around 83,000, predominantly Serbs. Filipović's story challenges us to confront the banality of evil. How a friar, trained in compassion, could orchestrate such depravity, and warns of the dangers when religion intertwines with ultranationalism. If this tale of darkness has gripped you, leaving shadows in your thoughts, consider subscribing to our channel for more dives into history's abyss. Ring that notification bell so you never miss another revelation. And drop a comment below. What aspect of Father Satan's story chills you the most? Share this video with a friend who thrives on true historical horrors. We build this community together.